welcome to Sightless Fun, a podcast about board game accessibility for people who are blind and vision impaired. My name is Jed, and with me is Ertai. We are both blessed with the life experience of RP, retinitis pigmentosa. No, that is not a Harry Potter spell. It is a real degenerative condition of the retina. I am a middle-aged Australian, public servant, and avid board gamer, or tabletop gamer of all sorts, really. And Ertai?
Thanks, Jed. Hi, I'm Ertai, and I come from Macedonia. Macedonia is a little country located in the heart of the Balkans, for those of you who don't know. As Jed said, I also have RP, and I'm a legally blind software engineer, also the creator of the Sightless Fun blog. I recently got more involved with board games and board game accessibility, so I hope to share my passion with other blind and visually impaired people, as it's a great hobby to replace something like video games.
So for those that don't know, when we say RP, we are referring to a condition called retinitis pigmentosa, which is not its full medical name, if I'm not mistaken. It is still a shorthand form of it. The nature of the condition is that your retina dies at an accelerated rate across the course of your life. That is, it is a degenerative disease of the retina. Standard progression is that you lose your night sight and your low light vision, followed by your peripheral vision, and then finally your central vision. This means that in conditions of low light, you will find it difficult or even impossible to see. Then with peripheral vision, you can't see things out to the sides. You may also experience your ability to distinguish colors diminishes, which is certainly something I have found. For example, yellow and white, blue and green, red, pink, maybe. They become difficult to distinguish if they're sitting side by side. So, and when I say, I should point out also when I talk about low light, I think it's important to note that what someone who is vision impaired means by low light and what someone who is sighted means by low light can be very, very different in that an environment that someone who is sighted might say, oh, there's quite a lot of light in here. That may not be the case for someone with vision impairment that is impacting their ability to perceive objects or perceive anything in conditions where there isn't as much light as, say, natural sunlight. So, do you have anything to add to that, Ertai? Ertai, I should say.
Ertai, yeah. So I'm gonna touch on the light part that you said. Like my left eye, I've started losing my central vision. Well, I've pretty much lost it by now. I can't really read or distinguish text with that eye. It's like looking through an ice cube. And I noticed that when I close my right eye, it's like the light in the room dims, like someone turns off the lights a bit. In real time, I can dim and brighten the light just by opening and closing my right eye.
It's a weird experience, you know. It's a really weird experience, vision loss, because especially when you have a degenerative condition, is that you can remember a time when you could do things, and video games is a very good example of that. For me, as well as you, in the sense that, I've just the other day I reinstalled SimCity 2000, which was awesome, and I booted it up and I started playing or tried to play, and it's just not how I remembered it because I used to be able to play it, and now it's a real challenge. What can you do? What are ways that you can implement changes or do things to be able to enjoy the pastimes you currently have or are interested in getting into? I mean, and we should say in terms of gaming, like, what was it about board games that drew you to board games? Like, why? How did you end up there?
Yeah, so I ended up in board games Well, it was by accident. My brother was just watching a video. It was not a video, it was actually a stream of Secret Hitler being played, and I just saw him laughing all the time, and just decided to check what he was looking at, and I decided to do a bit of research on the game. I saw that there was a free print and play. Oh, hey, this sounds like fun. Let's try it out. It was quite cheap to print it here in Macedonia. Like, cost me around €5 to print it in color and everything. And I just had a few mates over who tried it out. And fast forward 60 games or so, we were hooked up, like meeting like 2 to 3 times a week. Because it was new to everyone. We don't have a board gaming culture in my town. Like it's Macedonia is as small as a country, like only 2 million. My town is like 30 to 40,000, and board game, there's almost no board game culture. So it was new to everyone, and the social interaction factor was what made me love the hobby in a way.
And I think that's like one of the biggest positives of board gaming for people who are blind or vision impaired or any person with disability, because there is a higher level of social isolation among people with disability, and board gaming, tabletop gaming, is inherently a social activity. So if you are interested in it or you get into it, you are not just having this enjoyable pastime, playing games, what have you, but you're also having social interaction with a variety of other people who maybe you've never met them before. You meet new people through this hobby. So I think it's a really, really good in that regard as well. And it's certainly something that you can do, and that's in your posts on Sightless Fun. This is something you've covered, and something we will be talking about in this podcast about board game. What board games are the most accessible, and what games, how can we improve their accessibility? I mean, it's just something it's always on your mind, I suppose. But yeah, it's good. I like it. It's enjoyable. So Secret Hitler was your sort of first modern game. Do you have any memories of board games from years gone by? That 16-hour game of Monopoly, or
I think the first board game that I ever played was backgammon with my grandfather. I think I was like 4 or 5. I know he was teaching it to me because he didn't have anyone else to play with. I guess no, my dad or my uncle weren't too keen or were just too busy, so he needed to find... Basically, he was looking for a group. I guess when you have no people to play with, a 4-year-old kid is better than no one, or just playing solo.
It's actually funny. One of my brothers has just been learning backgammon recently, which is interesting.
And another game that I remember, like more vividly, let's say, is a game called Don't Be Angry Buddy. That's the literal translation. I think the game is German. We'll probably post a link to it in the show notes. And in that game, basically, I think it was played up to 4 people, but could easily be extended to more. Each player has 4 pawns that are parked, and when it's your turn, you need to roll a d6, and if you roll a 6, you can take one of your pawns out to the track. You need to do a lap and then park the...
Now you're explaining that game. I know I've never heard of it before, but now you're explaining it. That, I believe, one of the names at least goes by over here is Trouble. It's very frustrating.
And you can also... it's very simple, and you can also knock other pawns of other players and return them back to their parking spot, where they need
if you land on top of them.
Where they need to roll 6 again to get them out. But the problem with that game was if you can't roll a 6 and someone else like gets all their pawns out and finishes the game, you might be stuck with
Forever.
Yeah.
I remember playing that with my grandma actually. When we were kids, we used to play. It's just one of those games that I don't miss them.
Yeah.
And for that, we can all be thankful that we have the modern games that have been developed and have been absolutely thriving over the past, well, could probably even push it out for 2 decades now, certainly the last 10 years, with the amount of companies, the amount of games that are produced every year, but also the amount of awareness around gaming and games, or tabletop gaming and games, from YouTube series and channels and podcasts and all of that sort of stuff.
And what about you? What was your first game that you remember?
Well, you have mentioned Trouble, so I do admit to remembering that, but I it's difficult to say. I mean, certainly, as everyone in the West did, we played Monopoly, but I think probably even before that, I learnt to play crib. My grandparents were crib players, Mum was crib player, and I don't think I've ever beaten my mother at crib. I'm not a particularly good player, but I am a particularly good player of hearts, so if you know how to play. But my family has always been quite big on board games, so we, of course, we had Monopoly. We had another game called Rail Baron, which was by Avalon Hill, which was basically the same as Monopoly, except longer. Yes, it is possible. We never finished a game. That's how long it is. So yeah, we never finished a game. It was that long. We had Dad bought a game way back in the day called Kingmaker, which is a War of the Roses game, which actually has, as far as War of the Roses games, has a pretty decent rating on Board Game Geek. And then the other staple was, well, a lot of trick-taking games. But the staple of our gaming as a family was a game called Ming, which I believe is out of print at the moment, but that was only maybe 5 years ago it was still in print, I think. Certainly 10, it was still in print. I'd really like to get a copy. It's to call it a card game version of Mahjong is not quite accurate, but it's about as close as I can get to describing it. It uses the same suits and honor cards as Mahjong, so quite a lot of variety of different games, card games and board games and so on and so forth. So from there, it's kind of, I've always been into all things gaming, so there's been that. Computer games, tabletop wargaming I was introduced to when I was 12, and tabletop role-playing games when I was 13, so it's almost been 20 years since, so it's getting close to 20 years of both of those. Not quite yet, but we're getting there, so, and thankfully a lot of that I'm still able to enjoy now as my sight deteriorates, particularly role-playing games, but as we'll discuss, also a lot of board games, which is fantastic. Okay, so tell me, Atai, what inspired you to do Sightless Fun?
Yeah, so I think I've had the idea for over a year now that I wanted to start a website to talk about my hobbies, new hobbies that I started doing recently after my site was starting to go bad, and things that I had to new hobbies that I had to replace the old ones with. And when I got into board games, I ran into this website called Meeple Like Us. They do accessibility analysis on board games, and it was at that time when I was also working on an app to make Secret Hitler, a party game, accessible for the blind, because I was struggling with the game and really wanted to keep playing it with my friends. So after seeing Michael's work on the website and his wife as well, I thought that I could contribute by sharing my thoughts on visual accessibility in games and provide like solutions on how to make some of the games that I had more accessible, and things that I modify, or some ideas on how I play games blind, basically. Even though I still have some sight left, I pretty much play most games blind.
And I've noticed that on the reviews that have been put up, we've made sure to link to the Meeple Like Us accessibility takedown for the game in question, which is a really, another really good resource for people to have a read of. And it doesn't just cover vision impairment, but also cognitive and other other accessibility issues. Are there any closing remarks you want to make, Ertai?
I hope that more visually impaired and blind people get introduced to this hobby by their sighted people. So if you're a sighted person and listening to this podcast, if you have a blind friend or a visually impaired friend, there are plenty of games that they can play. And yeah, I think it's a perfect hobby to replace something like video games that blind people usually can do. There are certainly audio games out there, but this is a different experience. Like, the social interaction is what makes it great.
Awesome. Well, that is all from us for this brief introduction on who we are, what Sightless Fun is about, and what hopefully you get a bit of an idea there of some of the things we're going to be talking. Obviously focused on board games, but I'm sure we'll cover a wide range of enjoyable activities that people who are blind or visually impaired can get up to, and how it can all work together and all enjoy these various hobbies. So we hope you will join us, listening along, reading the posts that we put up, reviews and other sort of informative posts. Until then. This episode was hosted by Jed Alexander and Ertai Shashkov. Our episode editor is Alpai Shashkov. We'd also like to extend a special thank you to Fighting Windmills for allowing us to use their music in our podcast. You can find them at fightingwindmillsmk.bandcamp.com.